never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi guys, welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Today is another fantastic day for an interview, and I've got Pat Roos with me. And Pat has recently released her book, Surviving Alex. And it is her journey through the addiction and ultimately the death of her son. And the moment I knew what her current mission is all about, I knew I had to have this woman on my show. Pat, I take my hat off to you for being so honest and wanting to let people in onto your journey so that we can finally deal with the stigma that affects so many people, A, due to the addiction, B, due to the topic of suicide. Pat, you're a very courageous woman. Thank you so much for being on my show.
Thanks for asking me. It's a great opportunity.
My goodness. Here we are, and as I'm introducing you, a wave of emotions and thoughts were coming over me, and they came from all decades of my life. Some of them are bloody addicts, and you get some very weird thoughts coming in, and it was quite revealing to me just to step aside and just observe the rubbish that was going through my mind, despite the fact that I know very much as a doctor as well as a patient about addiction. The stigma is so huge out there. Was that something you encountered in your journey?
Oh, very much. I describe it in my book, Surviving Alex, as stark and raging. And I think the stigma came from places that one didn't always assume that the stigma would come from, and that is from the medical providers themselves, the people who were really in charge of trying to help Alex get out of his addiction.
Mm.
And he was in 12 rehabs over the course of approximately 3 years. And I think that the hospitals were one of the worst. He was at a psychiatric hospital where, the rehabs were and the detoxes were one thing, but if you go to a psychiatric hospital, you should get excellent care. And yet, within a short period of time, the doctors there, psychiatrists, social workers, labeled him as being really, all manner of pretty awful things, including a psychopath and a sociopath. And that was really because he didn't buy into the orthodoxy, the AA orthodoxy, which I am perfectly happy when that is something that helps people. I believe in multiple paths to recovery, and certainly AA is one of those paths, and it works. It absolutely works for some people. It doesn't work for all people. And yet that was really the only kind of support and medical support that he found over the course of during his active addiction. And so I think that was the saddest, to have that kind of stigma come from medical professionals. You have the run-of-the-mill stigma that you get. People want to believe that addiction is a choice, right? Or maybe they think it's a brain disease. But the problem is that both of those are very individualistic kinds of explanations. And I'm a sociologist, so I can buy the idea of personal choice, and I believe in personal choice, but I think what we have to do is take into account the larger context that those choices are made within that larger context. So it's a much more nuanced way of looking at addiction. And that's really one of the things that I want to introduced to people because people don't tend to think about it that way. It's easy to think about its choice, right? This person chose to do it. Alex chose to do it. And, Alex would say to us, "You think I chose this life?" No, he didn't choose this life, but, we didn't know. We were in that same kind of orthodoxy that everybody else was. And it's just so sad that
Mm.
those kind of stigmas, because what that personalistic view leads to is that, okay, the person is addict. I don't talk, I'm putting this in quotes, right? A person is an addict. The family must be partly responsible. And what do? You put the quote addict in jail. You shun the family.
Mhm.
That's just not the way that it should be working. We need to think about it in
Mm.
a much more nuanced way
Mm.
than just its choice.
Mm.
You have to think about it as all those other contexts in which those choices are made.
Mm. I think it is so important to acknowledge that we have a choice, and that the moment you pick up a drink, that you pick up a drug, you choose to inject it, but you choose it for a damn good reason, because the alternative is so much pain in your mind that you
Mm-hmm.
simply can't imagine going through that pain. And that pain
Mm-hmm.
is often playing out deep inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And many, many, many of people who seek refuge in drugs or in alcohol, they have got significant trauma in their
Yeah.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And going
Mm-hmm.
back to early childhoods and going sometimes back into different lifetimes, different stories, different
Mm-hmm.
intergenerational stuff. Um, were you able to see if there were some reasons, some trauma that might have contributed to Alex's choices?
You know, uh, we knew of no trauma, right? There's no, if you think about it, most of the explanations are either explanations that are due to um, psychological issues
Mm.
like depression or anxiety,
Mm.
other socioeconomic factors like poverty or trauma, abuse, racism, right?
Exactly.
So there are all those factors that play into it. I think in Alex's case, he told people at every single rehab that he was in that there was no trauma in his
Mm.
family. So for him, if there was trauma, no one knew about it. I always thought that there might have been some connection with 9/11. The year before he started exhibiting his anxiety, his anxiety, 9/11 happened. We lived in New Jersey, which
Mm.
was within the zone of fear and anxiety that we all had.
Mm.
And I remember taking Alex to school the next day. He was in sixth grade, and I remember taking him into school the next day, and there was a radio spot about someone in our town who had died, a
Mm.
father who had been in the towers, and I just burst into tears because this was so raw and so emotional for all of us who lived so close to New York City. And he said, "Mom, it's the circle of life." And we had just seen The Lion King, so, I knew where it came from, but how weird, how weird that he responded, because what was sort of freaky about it was he was so calm. And just the way he said it, he was so calm. And so a year later, when he started exhibiting the symptoms of anorexia, where he was controlling what he ate, and he got down to 68 pounds, which was like 75% of what he should weigh. So he was self-medicating in the
Mm.
same way that later he self-medicated with drugs. Back when he was in his first semester of 7th grade, it was a different kind. It was a control, right? He was controlling what he ate. And it was a kind of self-medication because he needed that control. And so I thought, gosh, maybe he's having this delayed reaction to 9/11. And I raised it with a couple of doctors, and no one seemed to give it any credence. So I kind of I mentioned it in my book. And sort of later in some of the rehabs, some doctors asked me, maybe he has PTSD. Well, of what? Because we were just your basic, normal, I call it in the book, good family. And it's like we did all those kind of things that people did when your kids are young, out in the backyard, having, playing manhunt and doing plays in the backyard. And there was a whole tribe of us that we met in the backyard, and, summer after summer after summer. And, it was very just your regular everyday family until all of a sudden my 12-year-old started restricting what he ate. So, clearly we had the idea at that point and moving forward that there was anxiety there, and that we watched it, and we had family who had that kind of anxiety and had that kind of eating disorders. And so, once we started learning all of that kind of history in our family, we became very aware of it and followed it like any good parents do, right? They keep track of these kind of things. He was in an eating disorder unit for months, and then another 6 months he was in partial hospitalization. And then he had months and months of therapy, nutritional therapy, psychological therapy. And he got back. He became, as I say in the book, we became a normal family again. We became a good family again because he just gained weight, and he decided that it was boring to be in that hospital, and he wanted to be home. He wanted to play baseball again. And so he was just your basic normal kid again. And so we thought, phew, we dodged a bullet. I remember a friend telling me at the time that she had read that there was a connection between eating disorders and drugs. And I just, my mind started going. I mean, I'm a college professor. I know how to do research. I'm a sociologist. And so I worried about it. From that day forward, I worried, oh my God, is he going to get into drugs? And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, because what's really there under the surface is that anxiety. And it needs some kind of self-medication. And if it wasn't controlling food, it was going to be something else. So, so we worried for years and years and years. And, he started soon after. I talked with his therapist. I talked with a lot of people for the book. I talked with his therapist. I talked with his friends. I talked with jailers. I talked with people in rehabs. I got information from every institution in which he resided. And so I have lots of information, often in his own words and journals that he had written. So I have his own words for what was going on in his head. And, what he said, even when he was in the eating disorder unit, he said, I want people, if I die of this, I want people to know, that you try. This doesn't have anything to do with you. This has to do with me. And it's like he took that as his responsibility. And, in one sense, it was, it was nice to know that he wasn't blaming us. Later on, when he got into drugs and he got older, then he blamed us for, controlling him too much, all the things that teenagers do. And then, because his life became very constrained. Once he began to lose friends because they didn't want to be around somebody who was taking drugs. So he got a different set of friends, and the kind of set of friends that you wouldn't want, because those are the people who were uh, giving him drugs and selling him drugs. And he certainly himself got into selling drugs. All people, not all, I don't know that for a fact, obviously, but when you just talk with moms who have lost their kids or who are dealing with kids in rehabs and so forth, or kids who are in active addiction, it seems like all of them smoke, right? Because that's what one does in rehabs. And it seems like all of them sell to each other, right? They get drugs, they sell to each other. And so, that's the life. That's part of the life of being a substance user. And so, well, there was this period of time of normality after he got out of the eating disorder unit, and things were going really well. And then he started in high school, he started drinking heavily again. And in college, he was blackout drinking, getting into drugs. And once he graduated, that's really when he became a heroin user. About the summer after he graduated from college. And, part of it was due to his life wasn't what he wanted it to be. He had an idea that he wanted to be a medical professional. First of all, he wanted to be a doctor, and then he wanted to be a dentist, and he got on the waiting list for 2 really excellent dental programs, and then he ended up not getting in. So that really added to this need on his part to think about, okay, I need to self-medicate. And so, heroin was his drug of choice, and a Xanax, right? He tried some other things as well, but it was really heroin. And he died before the fentanyl really took off in the US. He died in 2015. And if you look at those curves, right, in the US at least, 2015 was exactly when that curve of fentanyl use. And now most of the people who are overdosing on fentanyl in the US at least.
Exactly. And you're quite right. 2013-14 was the start of it in the rave scene setting. Oh, my goodness. So he was more drawn, or the availability was more towards heroin and towards other medications. Where did the money come from, may I ask?
That's a good question, because we, of course, stopped giving him money at some point. We paid for his college, and he had money through there. He started selling. In his senior year of college, he wrote, this is on one of his journal things that I learned, is that he started selling marijuana. And so I think he made a lot of money doing that. So that's where he got money.
Okay.
And he didn't start, as far as I know, he didn't start heroin until about 2013. He wasn't working at the time. And he ended up in the summer of 2012, he ended up having a DUI at the end of the summer of 2012. And that summer for us, for our family, was really a horrible, I call it in the book, the summer from hell, because we he graduated from college in May of 2012. And then 4 weeks later, his grandmother, Granny, we called her, and he was so close to her. She came up and lived in Florida, but came up and visited us constantly. in addition to other relatives from Florida. Chip, my husband's mother, and my husband's sister came up. We called her Pooh, and he was very close. But when Granny died, that was a really hard thing for him to accept. And 6 weeks later, Chip's brother died. He lived half a mile from us, and his wife had died of heart issues 8 years earlier. So Alex's two cousins came and lived with us. And so we went from a family of three to a family of five overnight. And Alex loved his cousins. He was very, very close to them. But you can imagine somebody who had been an only child all of a sudden had two additional younger siblings. And he wrote about that. It's interesting. Somebody said he talked to his friends about it, that he felt a responsibility to take care of them and move them in the right direction. So, that really added to sort of issues at the end of 2012. And that's really to 2013 is when he started. He went to a bar, and he found the guy, I guess the same guy that would give him other drugs. And the guy didn't have his drug of choice. And he said, well, what about, dope? And so Alex said, okay, I'll try it. And so at that point, that's when he switched to heroin, and then had his first overdose in 2013, that September. So at that point, it was providing him, as Maya Solovitz describes it, warm, buttery love. And that's exactly the way he described it, that it just gave him a sense of comfort, a sense of self, even as it was destroying his life. But you've talked with enough people, you've had experiences, that. I don't have to tell you that.
Oh, Pat, I just want to come across there and want to give you a huge hug because it is so hard. Here did you have those insights at the time, or was he a master in hiding it? Were you aware what was going on?
You mean the insights of
That
self-medication?
that's right, that you knew what was happening, or was he so good in hiding it that you were actually completely oblivious to what was
Oh,
going
no.
on?
No, we knew what was going on.
Right.
It was obvious because, first of all, he had this anorexia, so we knew he was anxious and having anxiety, and
Mm.
not so much depression, really anxiety. So, but we knew, because how can you not recognize the signs nodding off, at dinner, and
Right.
but we didn't really know that it was heroin until one day he was living in the basement. Once these two other kids arrived, we had to kind of restructure our house, and he was living in the basement. And we knocked on the door, and he didn't answer. We took the door off the hinges, and he was, out there flat. That was his first overdose that we knew about.
Mm.
And, we could see it. There was a heroin, it just looked so, it's like it didn't look like this horrible thing that you heard about, right? In the news or in movies. It was just this little packet, but there was a syringe, and he was out, and Chip started, pumping to get him up. I called the EMS, and by the time the EMS got there, he was sitting up and he was revived. And they didn't have to do Narcan at that point. But he had multiple overdoses after that time, and the police were there all the time, with Narcan, waking him up over and over and over again. And so, you can't not know what's going on. And so, did I have the same kind of insights that I have now?
Mhm.
No, because when you go through it, it's the worst possible thing, and you're furious and you're, and partly you want this out of your house, and you have two younger children that you have to protect. And so, it wasn't until I started writing my book that I realized that my insights as a sociologist were really helpful in helping me think about what happened, why did this happen to my family? And, sort of destroy is not quite the right word, but to question whether or not the conventional way that we think about this, that 12-step is the only possible way. And, I think that I didn't understand the term. I had never heard the term harm reduction. Is harm reduction big in New Zealand? Because it's really growing here. And reading about harm reduction, I became so enamored. And in my epilogue of my book, I have this what's called a counterfactual inquiry, which is what historians do when they imagine what your world would be like if this other thing didn't happen. So, what if JFK hadn't have been assassinated, right? What if Hillary Clinton had won the 2016 election, right? You can see how the world would change if those two things didn't happen. And so I write this counterfactual inquiry. What if we had lived in a compassionate, paradigm-changing world of harm reduction rather than the very punishing criminal justice world in which Alex lived his active addiction? I think a lot about that because I think the world would, I say in my book that I think that maybe I would have done different things, right? I would have been much more of a harm reductionist, but we didn't have that knowledge at that point. And so the only choice for us was to ship them off to yet another rehab, and the rehabs didn't work. There were a couple that were good. I mean, I will say that the last rehab that he was in Florida, I call Florida the non-recovery capital of the world because I think he had such a horrible experience there for the most part. But the last rehab he was in, he came to a realization of, he was clear enough. He was off drugs for that 30 days at least. And he decided he wanted to go back to graduate school, which he had already had a year of. And he decided it himself. He reapplied by himself. He found housing outside, close to, it was Rutgers, where he was in a graduate program. And he did it all himself. And so I was, wow, this is impressive because he knows what he wants. He is doing it. He's going after it. And then he made a mistake. And this is where the sort of personal choice piece comes in. He made a mistake and he stayed in Florida because he wanted to sort of experience the sober living houses in Florida. And they were a disaster, house after house, 4 houses he just ended up going to, and then that he just ended up walking into this. This is the part that's just infuriating to me. Another medical professional, right? He walked into an urgent care center, and within 20 minutes, walked out with 90. Let's see, what did he have? He had Ambien, he had 30 Ambien and 90 Xanax coming in off the street. That's what a medical professional gave to him. And that doctor spent literally no more than 20 minutes with him. And that's the problem with so much of the kind of medical care that these poor people who are still in these rehabs and sober living houses are getting time after time after time.
May I ask how his death came about? Was he going
His
back
death,
to his death? Yes.
death came about? Sure, yeah. So it was right after that last time he was in Florida. He came back and he agreed that he was wanted to move forward on his education. But when he came back, he was definitely he was high, and so the people who the place where he was going to stay required that he go to a rehab. And so he came back. I met him at the airport. That was the last time I saw him. And then he went to a detox place where, purely by chance, there was one of his college friends who he had done heroin with at one point,
Mm.
was working there. And this guy had gone, he was a 12-step person. He had done really well. He went to the 12-step. He believed he was going to die if he didn't change, and he changed. And ended up as a staff person in this detox. And he saw Alex. He spent a lot of time with Alex. Alex then was supposed to go to finish the detox, was supposed to go to what would have been his 13th rehab. He refused to go in. He rode the train back to Newark, and about 6 days later, he overdosed in a vacant lot in Newark. So, and then we didn't know until the next day when the police showed up at our house and knocked on our door. And of course, we knew immediately what was going on. So that was May 12th when they knocked on our door, and May 11th is when he died. So.
What
So
a
pretty
bit.
horrific, pretty horrific.
I'm so, so sorry to hear your story, because you would have hoped that in 12 rehabs, that on the one
Yep.
hand he will be exposed to people who are so charismatic and so beautiful that he can see that there is a life without drugs, that he can see role models who got their shit together. And I
Right.
think
Exactly.
that was such a beautiful realization for me, because when I
Yeah.
was in my rehab, everyone there was an addict. But they all got their shit together.
Mhm.
From the nurses to the yoga instructor, they all had been where I was.
Mhm.
And now
Mhm.
to actually see that they have not just survived, but thrived, well, that
Yeah.
was a huge, huge thing for me.
Yeah.
And it's so bizarre to hear you speaking rather negatively, because you would have spent gazillions on 12 rehabs. Can I assume that right? Was that all paid by you, or was that paid by state? So my question is really,
Insurance.
was it
Yeah.
so insurance? So this was actually a decent pay that has gone out. You would expect, therefore, that you don't just get the cheapest, low cost, whatever the public system has to offer.
Oh yeah. I mean, you must have read things about the U.S. The U.S. insurance system sucks. It's like, we need to have a system that is everybody needs to have insurance. We need I'm blocking on the name or
Mm.
the title of it, which I usually use, but um, everything, all the insurance comes from your workplace. So my husband and I both were professors at Rutgers. So we were insured by the state of New Jersey. And the insurance it was Cadillac Insurance, and we were so lucky to have
Mm,
that
mm,
insurance.
mm,
Uh, if people don't always have insurance at all, they can't
mm,
afford the insurance. Obamacare at least brought in insurance to make insurance more widely available, but it should be a public right,
mm,
not a privilege.
mm,
At this point, insurance in the US is a privilege that some of us have because we work for big organizations.
mm,
And big organizations, we had unions in the past, faculty unions,
mm,
and that in fact worked to develop excellent insurance for us and giving us sabbaticals and everything else that good unions do.
mm,
But if you don't have that, it really sucks. It's really horrible for those people who don't have insurance. So, long answer to your question, but our insurance paid for almost everything except for
everything.
the psychiatric hospital where we paid $30,000 out of pocket
Mm,
and never got reimbursed for that,
mm,
even though one of the first advocacy things that I did was to go and address issues of parity in insurance
mm,
and what people mean by that is that there should be parity between physical kinds of issues that you have versus mental health or substance use kinds of issues. And there's not parity there.
mm,
That if you have diabetes or heart issues or something like that,
mm,
mostly your insurance will cover everything. I've had a hip replacement. My husband has had other kinds of issues, and it's shocking how much they pay. I mean, thank God,
mm,
otherwise we'd be in the poorhouse. But we ended up having insurance pay for everything except
mm,
$30,000 by the
mm.
psychiatric hospital, which labeled him within a week a psychopath. So, that
Wow.
was not a good place.
Wow. I think the important bit also to realize is that there are so many different schools of thought and approaches towards addiction nowadays. There are specific there's the 12-step program, of course, but
Mhm.
there's also a whole other school of thought of focusing on to the future, focusing on creating such strong, beautiful habits and turning your life towards the future, um, and not labeling yourself with something that you may or may not find liberating and going out there. My goodness. Um, I think.
I think, though, can I just say that I think this is what being a sociologist has taught me, that um, I think it's wonderful to be um, sort of connected with yourself and change yourself. But I think it's so important to do that, understanding that there's this larger these larger set of factors that are at play that um, can negatively affect your ability to be able to do that, right? Racism, right?
Mm,
It's like poverty,
yep, absolutely.
you name it, socioeconomic issues that
Absolutely.
restrict people's ability. I mean, I told Alex multiple times, if you were Black, you'd be in jail by now, because of what you're doing. And, he understood that. Or if we lived in the inner city, if we were poor, right? If we were in poverty, if he had had, some trauma, right? Uh, but I think that understanding those larger set of factors, that context, sociologists love to use the word context, right? If the context in which your uh, you live your life is so important in understanding what do you do next, right? Because then it just doesn't become, oh, you got to change yourself, but it becomes broader. It says, we need insurance.
Mm,
We need
mm,
insurance for everyone. That
mm,
is something. I mean, the US is totally out of balance compared to where
mm,
everybody else, so many other countries in the world.
mm,
Um, so, to me, it's very, very important to keep that larger context in mind.
mm. I 100% agree. The problem is when once you start thinking in more abstract and sociological terms, it becomes a huge battle. It becomes a
Mhm.
huge task, which needs to be on
Mhm.
for a society. But
Mhm.
as a mum and dad who are now suffering and feeling helpless and hopeless because their son or daughter are struggling with their demons,
Mhm.
not just the normal question marks about their teenager years, but now you throw in drugs, maybe some sexual or gender confusion, some
Mhm.
bullying, some the generally raised levels of anxiety in that age group. As
Mhm.
parents, you think, oh my God, what can I do? And especially, what can I do if I don't have the bells and whistles of the
Yeah.
private insurance system? I
Right.
mean, you must meet so
Well,
many people who are
yeah,
in that boat. What would you tell
sure.
such a mum?
People ask me that all the time. And I think that from a parent's point of view, right, you need to be aware of what the risks are. So, what are the risks in your family? So, you need to assess risk for yourself. If you have a family that has issues of, anxiety or depression, that's really important to know.
Mm,
But also when you're making choices, right? If you're at the point where you feel like your son or daughter or husband or wife, right? It's not just kids,
mm,
needs treatment. I think the treatment, it's so important to find treatment that works, as opposed to the 12 rehabs that Alex went to, not one of them allowed for medicine, right? It was 12 step and it was only 12 step. And Alex was constantly denigrated for not following uh, the 12-step model, right? He didn't like it. He resisted it. Um, and nowadays, things have changed. This is one of the places where things have changed. And there's still so much negativity. But here's the one thing that has changed is that it's not just the 12 step. The 12 step exists, and for some people that works.
mm,
But the other kind of treatment that's available, and also, whether or not you have inpatient versus outpatient, but there are treatment programs where that provide medications, and many 12, I think 12-step programs are beginning to uh, relax these restrictions. But there's MAT, right? There's methadone, there's MOUD, right? Medications for opioid use disorder, right? These have been demonstrated by sort of scientific knowledge to work, right? So it doesn't make sense to say
mm,
that it's trading heroin for another drug, right? Or fentanyl for another drug.
mm,
It works. And
mm,
so if we think about it in that way, there's also treatments that I have heard about just very recently, which one of them is called NET, N-E-T, a NET device, which is in trial in the US. And it sounds, almost unbelievable that it's working. A friend of mine had her daughter uh, used this device, and her cravings stopped almost uh, immediately. And so but the reason is the difficulty here is that there's no economic incentive, right? The pharmaceutical companies don't get anything out of it. Rehabs don't get anything out of it because if it works, right? And the U.S. is now it's just been FDA approved. And there are others. That's not the only. There are other treatment programs that were nothing like that. I knew nothing like that. And just the whole harm reduction approach, right, which has such a different approach to dealing with people who have substance use issues, right? You meet them where they are. I'm sure you've heard that terminology, right? You meet them where you are, and you bring them along until they're at the point where they can agree that they don't want to do this anymore. I think that I just think that there's different ways, and throwing people in jail. I mean, the U.S. is just horrendous in terms of throwing people in jail, and the whole criminal justice system is oriented toward throwing people in jail if they possess drugs. I mean, here's the bizarre thing, is that Alex was arrested for possession of marijuana, and yet a few years later, marijuana was decriminalized entirely in New Jersey. So here he was arrested for something that a few years later was okay, it's okay. That's the kind of context that I'm talking about, right? The legal context. And it's not just this complex thing up here. It's something that you can do something about, right? You can, be an activist against those kinds of policies. And look, I'm not saying that personal kinds of bettering yourself in personal ways. I think that is great. I mean, that's one of the things that I did after I lost Alex. I tried to think, what do I do? How do I do this? And so I buy into that, but I think not at the expense of dealing with those larger. I think as an activist, that's really what I want to focus on, those kind of broader context things, the legal stuff, which is just horrendous here. And we really have to push politicians to have some political will that they will do something about this, rather than just say, oh, it's just like personal choice, or, oh, it's really a brain disease. Well, it's much, much, much more than that.
And here you are, just going through the Hunter Biden trial, which would have been a unique opportunity to highlight the addiction issues in your country. Yet it becomes a political bloody witch hunt, and everyone jumps onto the complete whatever wagon that they drive. Oh, it's just, my goodness.
It's so funny that you say that, because last weekend, I got inspired and I wrote an op-ed about Hunter Biden.
Right.
And my argument was really, I'm not writing about the legal, the political stuff. I'm writing about the relationship between a guy who has substance use issues and his family. And you saw this. I haven't gotten it published yet, but I'm searching because I want to get it published, but I have to get there before the moment's gone, right? But you're right. It was just, nobody's talking about it. And here's a guy who had substance use issues. He was full blown, addict, as people like to talk about it, right, in the news. And he ended up, I mean, that stigma, you asked earlier about stigma, that stigma was in full display at trial, because they had a video of him reading from his journal They had people, former partners come in and talk about it. That they were describing his addiction.
Mm.
But yet they found him guilty. I mean, on the law, I think he did what they said he did. But what's the larger picture there?
Mm.
Why was that even brought to, why was he even prosecuted? But mostly, my bottom line here is that, here we have on public display somebody who was in active addiction, full-blown addiction. And what are we doing? We're prosecuting him as
Mm.
opposed to saying, wow, he's been sober since 2019.
Mm.
Why do we do this? It makes no sense to me.
Isn't it? Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are many, many things wrong with us as a society. And when I say us, then I think the same implications are there for Germany, for many, many other countries. And there are attempts there to decriminalize everything, which seems on the one hand to be actually quite a good idea. But then when you go back to those countries a few years later, you will see that they are actually pulling back from the decriminalization and actually saying, maybe it was not such a good idea. So any kind of blanket statement to say, oh, that's what we should do as a society. Yeah, right. That doesn't work. But that does not absolve us from asking the hard questions, and maybe even better, come up with some solutions and bring
Right.
them to the table to actually start a discussion, a meaningful discussion about these topics. Because
Mhm.
only by making them personal, bringing them away from the kind of abstract, university kind of level discussions that politicians probably don't really care so much about, and normal people don't get exposed to. It is, where do we go here? And I think you made such a big step forward by actually opening up your own journey to the world
Mhm.
and writing about it in Surviving Alex. Your own
Mhm.
journey is so important there, and it is so important that people hear your words, read your
Mhm.
words, and are able to cut through the crap and
Mhm.
actually feel the feelings of a mother, and to imagine themselves, to also get some reflection, get some maybe hope, get some gratitude if somehow their child took a different trajectory and maybe got
Mhm.
themselves clean. Maybe
Mhm.
there's a bigger appreciation of what a loved one has gone through who is now in recovery. There's so many positives coming from reading a book like yours. For that, I want to thank you. Absolutely. So please show us your book, Surviving Alex. I know you've got a copy there.
Here it is.
Exactly.
He
So,
was 15 years old then. And it's a beautiful book. Rutgers University Press did a fantastic job on this
mm,
book. They included a whole set of pictures, 20 colored pictures, right?
uh,
Starting from when he was a baby. He was just born, and a picture that was our Christmas picture back in 1989. So, it was just, they did a beautiful job.
mm,
I'm very happy with it.
mm.
And
Pat, sorry.
go ahead.
No, no,
I was
Pat.
just, my goal, just
Mhm.
to comment on what you just said, my goal in writing the book was every day when I sat down, I thought about moms, parents like me, who needed some kind of, needed to, not a roadmap, but a description of what it
Mm,
is
mm,
to be seen. I think that's so important. So
mm,
that's what I did. I mean, I
mm,
just opened my life, our life. My husband wrote chapter in the book, and he's much sort of more emotional and raw than I am. I'm compartmentalized, and that's the only way I could get through this. But it became therapy. But I thought about those parents, and then I thought about all those people who think that it couldn't happen to them. And I say this multiple times in the book. I said, if it happened to my good family, my normal family, it could happen to anybody. Don't think it can't happen to you. And so
Right.
those are the two audiences that I want to get to.
Mm.
People who went through it and people who think that it can't happen to them because they're just too good parents, you know. It can
If it
happen to you.
if
It
it
can
was
happen.
so easy, isn't it? If it was so
Absolutely.
easy. My goodness. Where can people find you? Where can people, if they want to look you up, if they want to see more about you?
Sure. I have a webpage,
Mm,
which is basically my name, patroos.com. If you open it up, as soon as you get there, it gives you the book,
mm,
but it also has a lot of other information, including resources, which I thought was very, very important that I wanted
mm,
to make sure that I provide
mm,
resources to people who might be going through this trauma. So I have a resources section of the web page where I show all the books, all the memoirs, and provide books on substance use, mental health issues, memoirs, because
mm,
that's what I did. I got lost in the memoirs. And then finally, there's a section on educational and support
mm,
kinds of institutions that are available, not institutions, web pages mostly,
mm,
and that people can turn to.
mm.
And there's a whole set that just didn't even exist when I was going through
Wow.
this.
Wow.
And, it's just like being around other people who are like you. This is what's critically important, to feel like somebody sees me, somebody knows what I'm going through. I'm not alone.
Mm.
Uh, and I want people to say, Pat Roos, she sees me, right? She knows, she understands what I'm going through because she went
Mm.
through it herself. So, but that's where to get me, patroos.com. And I hope
Mm.
people read the book because I
Mm.
want it to be something that is helpful to
Absolutely.
people and helpful
Mm.
in an activist way as well. Provide solace for people who need it, but also in an activist way that says, we got to do something. We have
Mm.
to do something. We have to move to a public health way of thinking about addiction
Mm.
rather than criminal justice. That's the problem in the US right now, is that
Mm.
politicians just want to be seen as being tough on crime. And,
Yeah,
this could be their kid. So
very
they
true.
should be careful about what they wish for.
Pat, you're an amazing woman. Guys, look down there
Thank you.
into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast. Pat's
Uh-huh.
links are down there. Pat, I wish you all the strength and energy to go out there and shout it from the rooftops and get the
Mhm.
right people to listen. More importantly, the right people then to consider taking action.
Mhm.
And I think
And
if
thank you for helping me do that.
perhaps I
I
think
really appreciate
uh,
it.
it is so difficult. Here we are preaching to the choir, the two of us.
Right,
And
right.
having said that, being out there trying to change the world is a terribly lonesome place.
Yeah,
So therefore, by
yeah.
just us two linking up and working together and just giving you the validation and that assurance that yeah, wow, what a beautiful journey, and you're on the right track there. That is so
Mhm.
powerful because otherwise there are these all these imposter syndrome and little voices in
Yeah.
your head which try to sort of cut you down, and it's so much easier to just shut up and maybe have
Stigmatize you.
well, exactly. So
Yeah.
no, you're doing exactly the right thing, and I wish you all the energy to continue doing so, and all the inspiration to address the right people, may that be through lobbying, through your Congress, or whatever path you find, the more we can bring these topics to the table, the more maybe, just maybe, we can actually make this a better world.
I
Pat,
hope so.
Pat, thank you so much for your time. Look after yourself, okay?
And thanks for having me. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with intention. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Trying